In the early hours of December 18, he invited them into another restaurant where over breakfast he talked of his business, his marriages, and his activities as a registered clown. At one point during the conversation, he remarked, "You know, clowns can get away with murder." This time, our focus will be on the murder. I hope you're all okay with that. Now, let's begin. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, and died May 10th. 1994. He was an American serial killer and a sex offender, known as the Killer Clown, who assaulted and murdered at least 33 young men and boys. Born in Illinois, Chicago, was the second child and only son of John Stanley Gacy and Marian Anahi Robinson. His father was an auto repair machinist and a World War I veteran, and his mother was a homemaker. From a birth, his father expected high of his only son. John was very close to his mother and two sisters, but endured a difficult relationship with his father, an alcoholic, which caused him to range and abuse his family. His father also belittled him, calling him dumb, stupid, and comparing him to his unfavorable with his sisters. One of his earliest memories was his father beating him with a leather belt for accidentally disarranging components of a car. His mother tried to shield him from his father's abuse, but only resulted in accusation that he was a sissy and a mama's boy who would probably grow up queer, as the father said. Despite the mistreatment, John still loved his father, but he felt he was never good enough in his father's eyes. In 1949, John's father was informed that his son and another boy had been caught sexually fondling a young girl. His father whipped him with a razor strop as a punishment. That same year, a family, a friend, and a contractor who would sometimes molest John in his truck. He never told his father about this, afraid that his father would blame him. John was an overweight and an unathletic child. Because of a heart condition, he was told to avoid all sports at school. In 1957, for a burst of appendix, he later estimated that between the ages of 14 and 18, he had spent almost a year in a hospital and attributed the decline of his grades to missing school. His father suspected these episodes were an effort to gain sympathy and attention, and openly accused his son of faking the conviction as John laid in the hospital bed. Although his mother, his sisters, and a few close friends never doubted his illness, John's medical condition was never conclusively diagnosed. In 1960, at age 18, John became involved in politics, working as an assistant pre-elected captain for a Democratic Party candidate in his neighborhood. This led to more criticism from his father, who accused his son of being a patsy. He later speculated his decision to become involved in politics was actually to seek the acceptance from others that he never received from his father. The same year John's political involvement began, his father bought him a car. He kept the vehicle's title in his own name until he had finished paying for it. This monthly payment took several years for him to complete. His father would confiscate the keys to the vehicle if he did not do as he said. In 1962, he purchased an extra set of keys after his father had confiscated the original set. In response, his father removed the distributor cap, keeping the component for 3 days. John recalled he felt totally sick and drained after this incident. Hours after his father replaced the distributor cap, John left home and drove to Las Vegas, Nevada. He found work within the ambulance service before he was transferred to work as an attendant at Palm, Monterey. He worked there for 3 months, observing morticians embalming dead bodies. John later confessed that one evening, while alone, he had clambered into a coffin of a deceased teenage male, embracing and caressing the body before experiencing a sense of shock. The next day, he called his mother to return home. He drove back to Chicago that same day. Upon returning home, John enrolled at Northwestern Business College despite having failed to graduate from high school. He graduated in 1963 and took a management trainee position within the Nunn-Bush Shoe Company. In 1964, the shoe company transferred him to Springfield, Illinois, to work as a salesman and eventually promote him to manager of his department. In March of that year, he became engaged to Marilyn Myers, a co-worker. During the courtship, John joined the local Gacy's and worked tirelessly for them, being named King Man in April of 1964. That same year, he had his second homosexual experience with a colleague who invited him to have drinks at his home. After a few drinks, his colleague performed oral sex on John while he was drunk. By 1965, he had risen to the position of vice president of Springfield Gacy's. That same year, he was named the third most outstanding Gacy in the state of Illinois. John and Marilyn married in September 1964. Marilyn's father subsequently purchased 3 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. The couple moved here so John could manage the restaurants, with the understanding that he would move into Marilyn's parents' former home. The offer was lucrative. He would receive $15,000 per year plus a share of the restaurant's profits. Following the obligatory completion of a management course, he relocated to Waterloo with his wife. He opened a club in his basement where his employees could drink alcohol and play pool. Although John employed teenagers of both sexes at his restaurant, he socialized only with the young men. John gave many of them alcohol before he made sexual advances. If they rebuffed him, he would claim his advances were simply jokes or a test of morals. John's wife gave birth to a son in February of 1966 and a daughter in March of 1967. John later described this period of his life as perfect, as his parents had come visited, into which, his surprise, his father apologized for the physical and emotional abuse he had inflicted throughout his son's childhood and adolescence, and said, "Son, I was wrong about you," as he shook John's hand. In Waterloo, John joined the local Gacy's chapter, regularly offering extended hours to the organization in addition to the 12 and 14-hour days working managing the 3 KFC restaurants. His workers admire his ambitions and contribution to the society, earning himself an outstanding vice president award of the Waterloo Gacy's. Now serving as a board director, John and other Waterloo Gacy's were deeply involved in wife swapping, prostitution, and pornography, and drug use. In August 1967, John sexually assaulted 15-year-old Donald Voorhees, the son of a fellow GE. He piled Voorhees with alcohol, allowed him to watch a stag movie, then persuade him to engage into mutual oral sex, adding, "You have to have sex with the man before you start having sex with the woman." Over the following months, John similarly abused several other youths, including one whom he encouraged to have sex with his own wife, before blackmailing him into performing oral sex on him. He tricked several teenagers into believing he was commissioned to conduct homosexual experiments in the interest of a scientific research and paid them up to $50. In March 1968, Voorhees reported to his father that John had sexually assaulted him. Voorhees Sr. immediately informed the police, who arrested John and subsequently charged him with performing oral sodomy on Voorhees and the attempted assault of a 16-year-old Edward Lynch. Denying the charges, he agreed to take a polygraphy test. He failed, and his excuse was because he was nervous. John publicly denied any wrongdoing and insisted the charges against him were politically motivated, as Voorhees Sr. had opposed John's nomination for an opponent as president of the Iowa Gacy's. Many co-workers believed his claim and supported his rally. However, he was found guilty of his charges in May of 1968. On August 30th, 1968, John persuaded one of his employees, 18-year-old Russell Schroeder, to physically assault Voorhees in order to discourage the boy from testifying against him in court. He promised to pay Russell $300. He agreed, and in early September, he lured Donald to an isolated county park, sprayed mace in his eyes, then beat him. But Donald survived and proceeded to call the police with an accurate description of Russell. The following day, he was arrested and admitted to who was behind the scenes. This added an additional charge to John's sentence. On September 12th, 2 doctors examined John over a period of 17 days, concluded that his behavior pattern was likely to bring him into repeated conflict with society. The doctors concluded he was mentally competent to stand trial. On November 7th, 1968, John pleaded guilty to 1 count of sodomy in relation to Voorhees, but not guilty to the charges related to other use. He claimed Donald Voorhees had offered himself to him and that he acted out of curiosity. His story was not believed. December 3rd, John's wife petitioned for divorce, requesting she be awarded of the couple's home, property, sole custody of their 2 children, and an alimony. The court ruled in her favor and the divorce was finalized on September 18, 1969. John never saw his children or wife again. While in prison, his reputation preceded him as a model, worked up his way to several projects, and promises to help inmates' conditions in prison. John oversaw the installation of a miniature golf course in the prison recreation yard. May 1970, he completed 16 high school courses for which he obtained his diploma in November 1969. On Christmas Day, 1969, John's father had died. He collapsed on the floor sobbing. He requested to attend the funeral but was denied. John was granted parole with 12 months probation on June 18, 1970, after having served 18 months of his 10-year sentence. Conditions of his probation included that John relocate to Chicago to live with his mother and that he must observe a 10 p.m. sharp curfew. John had told his friends that he will never go back to prison and he plans to re-establish himself in Waterloo. However, hours after his release, he relocated in Chicago. He was able to obtain a job as a short-order cook in a restaurant. On February 12th of 1971, John was charged with sexually assaulting a teenage boy who claimed that he had lured him into his car at a Chicago's Greyhound bus terminal and driven him to his home, where he attempted to force the boy into sex. The court dismissed the complaint when the boy failed to appear. On June 22nd, John was charged again for sexual assault, but charges were dropped after the complaint attempted to blackmail John. The Iowa Board of Parole did not learn any of these incidents, and 8 months later, in October 1971, John's parole ended. The following months, records of John's previous criminal convictions were sealed. With financial assistance of his mother, he resided near a village of Northridge in Northwood Park Township and an incorporated area of Cook County, itself a part of a metropolitan Chicago. The address: 8213 West Somerdale Avenue would be the place where he would commit all of his murders, at least according to John Wayne Gacy. John was active in his local community and helpful towards his neighbors, always lending a hand even when he wasn't asked to help. Between 1974 and 1978, he hosted annual summer parties attended by up to 400 people, including politicians. August 1971, shortly after John and his mother moved into his house, he became engaged to Carol Hoff, a divorcee with 2 young daughters whom he had briefly dated in high school. They quickly moved into his home after getting engaged, and his mother proceeded to move out. By 1975, he confessed to Carol that he was bisexual. On Mother's Day, the couple had intercourse, and John informed her that that would be the last time. Over time, he spent his days away from home and telling his family he had been working late. However, Carol observed John bringing teenage boys into the garage. In the early hours, She had also found gay pornography and men's wallets and identification inside the house. She confronted John. He angrily responded that it was none of her business. October 1975. Carol asked for a divorce. He agreed. With mutual consent, Carol and her daughter lived at the West Summer Take House until February 1976, when they found their own apartment. On March 2nd, their divorce was finalized as upon false grounds of John's infidelity with women. In 1971, with approval of his parole officer, he established a part-time construction business of painting, decorating, and maintenance, also known as PMD. John quit his job as a cook in mid-1971 to work full-time to his construction business. By 1978, PDM's annual revenue was over $200,000. Through his membership in a local mouse club, John became aware of a Jolly Joker clown club, whose members regularly performed at fundraising events, parades, in addition to volunteering entertaining hospitalized children. He wanted to be a part of that too. By 1975, two new clowns joined the club, known as Pogo the Clown and Patches the Clown, portrayed by the one and only John Wayne Gacy. Pogo was a happy clown, whereas Patches was a serious clown. Dressing and acting like his clown characters allowed John to regress into childhood. Pogo and Patches performed in numerous local events, including political elections, children's hospitals, and charity events. At times, John would remain in his suit and go to a local bar for a few drinks. John's voluntary public service as a clown throughout the years of his murders led him to being known as the Killer Clown. Much of the PDM's workforce consisted of high school students and young men. John would often proposition his workers for sex or insist on sexual favors in return for acts such as lending his vehicles, financial assistance, or promotions. Claiming to own guns, John would threaten the boys, claiming how easy it would be for him to get rid of their bodies. On July 26, 1976, John picked up an 18-year-old David Cram as he hitchhiked on Elston Avenue. John offered him a job with PDM, and he began working that same evening. On August 21st, Cram moved into his house. The next day, Cram and John had several drinks to celebrate his 19th birthday. With John dressed as Pogo, John conned David into donning handcuffs, his wrists cuffed in front of his body rather than behind. Then he swung David around while holding the chain linking the cuffs. Then he said he intended to rape him. David kicked John in the face and freed himself from the handcuffs. Handcuffing and dressing up as one of his clown suit and luring him into his home would be John's way of getting his sexual needs met from young boys and young men. A month later, John appeared to David's bedroom intending to rape him, saying, "Dave, You really don't know who I am. Maybe it would be good if you give me what I want. David resisted, straddling John, who left the bedroom, stating, "You ain't no fun." David moved out on October 5th and left BDM, although he did periodically work for John over the following 2 years. Shortly after he moved out of John's house, 18-year-old Michael Rossi moved in. He worked for PDM until 1976. Michael sometimes assisted John in clowning at grand openings of businesses, John as Pogo and Michael as Patches. He moved out in April of 1977. John also entered into local Democratic Party politics, initially offering use of his help in cleanup. In 1975, John was appointed director of Chicago's annual Polish Constitution Day parade, an event he would supervise until 1978. Through his work with the parade, John met and was photographed with the First Lady, Rosalynn Carter, on May 6 of 1978. That event later became an embarrassment to the United States Secret Service. In the pictures, John is wearing an S pin, indicating a person given special clearance. A young man by the name of Robert Piest was reported missing by his parents, who turned over the information to the Des Plaines police. After speaking with the mother of Robert on December 12th, Lieutenant Joseph Koskanigate, cannot pronounce his last name, became convinced that the young man did not run away from home. John had been linked to the case as he was seen with Robert after Robert went into his business office to ask for a job. Authorities proceeded to do a background check on John. It led them to find a criminal background with outstanding battery charge against him in Chicago, and had served a prison sentence in Iowa for sodomy of a 15-year-old boy. Joseph and 2 other officers visit John's home the following evening. John indicated he had seen 2 youths working at the pharmacy and that he had asked one of them, whom he had believed to be Robert Piest. He was adamant, however. He had said that he had not offered Robert a job and had only returned to the pharmacy shortly after 8 p.m., as he had left his appointment book at the store. He proceeded to tell the officers he can write down his statement at the station later that evening to confirm this, indicating he was unable to do so at the moment as his uncle had just died. When questioned as to how soon he'd come to the police station, he responded, "You guys are very rude. Don't you have any respect for the dead?" At 3:20 a.m., John arrived at the police station covered in mud, claiming he had been involved in a car accident. He had returned to the police station later that day and denied any involvement in Robert's disappearance and repeated that he had not offered him a job. When asked why he had returned to the pharmacy, detectives requested John prepare a written statement detailing his movements on December 11th. The Des Plaines did not buy John's story, so they obtained a warrant to search his home, which led them to find multiple suspicion items, finding officer badges, 6mm Beretta starter pistol, inside an office drawer, a syringe, a hypodermic needle inside a cabinet in John's bathroom. Investigators also found handcuffs, books on homosexuality and pedestry, 7 pornographic films, capsules of amulet, and an 18-inch dildo in his bedroom. A 39-inch 2x4 with holes drilled into each ends, bottles of Valium and atropine, and several driver's licenses were found in the northwest bedroom. A blue hooded parka was found on top a toolbox inside a laundry room. An underwear too small to fit John was located inside a bathroom closet. After this first search warrant, John was put into surveillance as he was considered a person of interest of Robert's disappearance. The following day, and phone calls by Michael Rossi, who informed the investigators of Gregory Skozic's disappearance and the fact that another BDM employee, Charles Hatula, had been found drowned in an Illinois river earlier that year. On December the Des Plaines police obtained further information upon property disappearance leading to John luring into his car, then chloroformed, raped, and tortured him before dumping him with severe chest and facial burns and reactable bleeding. An interview was held with John's former wife. That same day, they learned of the disappearance of John Budovich. A high school ring found in John's room revealed it had belonged to John Allen Sneak. By December 16, John tried to make an acquaintance of the officers by buying or offering food and drinks, repeatedly saying that he has nothing to do with Robert's disappearance, and accused the officer of assault of his political connection or because of his recreational drug use. One of the officers claimed because of John's lack of timekeeping, he had given him a watch, claiming he had got it from a dead person. Investigators conducted a formal interview with Rossi on December 17. He informed them that John had sold Snake's vehicle to him, explaining that he had bought the car from John because he needed money to move to California. A further examination of John's Oldsmobile was conducted of this date. In the course of examining the trunk of the car, investigators discovered a small cluster of fibers which may have been human hair. 3 trained German shepherds had picked up death reaction in the passenger seat, indicating Robert's body had been present in the vehicle. In the early hours of December 18, he invited them into another restaurant where over breakfast he talked of his business, his marriages, and his activities as a registered clown. At one point during the conversation, he remarked, "You know, clowns can get away with murder." By December 18, John was beginning to show signs of strain of the consent surveillance. He was unshaven, looked tired, appeared anxious, and was drinking heavily. The afternoon, he drove to his lawyer's office to prepare a $7,500,000 civil suit against the Des Plaines police, demanding that they cease their surveillance. That same day, the serial number of a Nissan pharmacy photo receipt found in John's kitchen was traced to a 17-year-old Kimberly Byers, a colleague of Robert Beist. At a Nissan pharmacy, Byers admitted, when contacted in person the following day, that she had worn the jacket on December 11 to shield herself from the cold. She had placed the receipt in the parka pocket just before she gave the code to Robert Peist, as he had left the store claiming a contractor wanted to speak with him. This statement contradicted John's previous statements that he had no contact with Robert Peist on the evening of December 11th. A second interview with Michael Rossi. This time he was more cooperative. He informed detectives that in the summer of 1977, at John's behest, he had spread 10 bags of lime in the crawl space of John's house. On December 19, investigators began compelling evidence for a second search warrant for John's house. That same day, John's lawyers filed the civil suit against the Des Plaines police. December 22nd would be the hearing for the suit. However, John incurred the surveillance into his home once again. An officer attempted to distract John while the other went into his bedroom, and a smell he suspected could be that a rotting corpse and matting from a heating duct. The officers who had searched his house previously had failed to notice this, as his house had been cold. Investigators interviewed both David Cram and Michael Rossi. On December 20th, Rossi had agreed to be interviewed in relation to his possible links with the John Psych, as well as his disappearance of Robert Peist. When questioned by Joseph Kosovic as to where else he believed John had concealed Robert's body, Michael replied, John may have placed the body in the crawl space, adding that he thought John Sykes' car was stolen. David Cram informed investigators of John's attempts to rape him in 1976. He stated that after he and John had returned to his home after the December 13 search of his property, John had turned pale after seeing a clot of mud on his carpet, which he had suspected had come from his crawl space. David stated these trenches were the size of graves. On the evening of December 20th, John drove to his lawyer's office in Park Ridge to attend a scheduled meeting, ostensibly to discuss the progress of his civil suit. He picked up a copy of the Daily Herald from Emmett's desk, pointed to a front-page article covering the disappearance of Robert Peist, and said, "This boy's dead. He's dead. He's in a river." Dismissed his victims as male prostitutes, hustlers, liars, to whom he gave the rope trick, adding he sometimes awoke to find dead, strangled kids on his floor with their hands cuffed behind their back. He had buried the bodies in his crawl space, as he has believed they were his property. As a result of alcohol he had consumed, John fell asleep midway through his confession. On unwaking several later, John shook his head when he informed by the Emirate he had confessed to killing approximately 30 people, saying, "Well, I can't think about this right now. I've got things to do." Ignoring his lawyer's advice regarding to his scheduled appointment, he left their office to attend the needs of his business. John later recollected his memories of his final days of freedom as being hazy, adding He knew his arrest was inevitable and that he intended to visit his friends and say his final farewells. The end is coming for me. These guys are going to kill me, he said. John hugged Rod before bursting into tears and saying, I've been a bad boy. I killed 30 people, give or take a few. As John spoke with him, David informed the surveillance officers that John had told them and Michael that he had confessed to over 30 murders with his lawyers the previous evening. John then had Dave drive him to Mare Hill Cemetery, where his father was buried. Back at his home, after it had done so, evidence technician Daniel Jenny entered the 28 by 38 foot crawl space, crawled to the southwest area, and began digging. Within minutes, he had uncovered petrified flesh and a human arm and bone. Daniel immediately shouted to the investigators that they could charge John with murder, adding, I think this place is full of kids. Discovering the rib cage of a fourth victim within the crawl space, uncovering 2 lower leg bones. After being informed that the police had found human remains in his crawl space and that he would now face murder charges, John told officers he wanted to clear the air, adding he had known his arrest was inevitable since the previous evening, which he had spent on the couch in his lawyer's office. John provided a formal statement in which he confessed to murdering approximately 30 young males, all of whom he claimed had entered his house willingly. Some victims were referred to by name, but John claimed not to know or remember most of the names. When questioned about Robert, John confessed to luring him into his house and strangling on the evening of December 11th. He also admitted to having slept alongside Robert's body that evening before disposing of the corpse in the Des Plaines River in the early hours of December 13. On his way to the police station, he had been in a minor traffic accident after disposing of Robert. His vehicle had slid off an ice-covered road and had to be towed from its location. The crawl space was marked in sections, and each body was given an identifying number. John had buried these victims in the northeast section of the crawl space, directly beneath the room he used as his office. No cause of death could be determined. Body 8 was found with a tourniquet used to strangle him still knotted around his neck. Body 9 was found beneath a layer of concrete and was found to have several stab wounds to the ribs and a sternum, suggesting he was John's first victim. More bodies were found after Christmas, either found further into his home, which had gotten worse and worse to discovering how the young boys and men died. Being clothed, suffocated, socks found, rope. Several were also found with the rope still around their necks. In some cases, bodies were found with foreign objects such as prescription bottles logged into their pelvic region, the position of which indicated the items had been thrust into the victim's anus. Stein concluded 12 victims recovered from John's property died not of strangulation but of suffocation. John's vacant house was demolished in April 1979. On March 16, body 29 was found beneath the dining room. On April 9, 1979, a decomposed body was discovered entangled in exposed roots on the edge of the Des Plaines River in Grundy County. The body was identified using dental records as being that of Robert Peist. A subsequent autopsy revealed that 3 wads of paper-like material had been shoved down his throat while he was still alive, causing him to suffocate. John was brought to trial on February 6 of 1980, charged with 33 murders. He was tried in Cook County, Illinois. He underwent a variety of psychological tests before a panel of psychiatrists to determine whether he was mentally competent to stand trial. John tried to convince the doctors that he had a multiple personality disorder. He claimed to have 4 personalities: the hard-working, civil-minded contractor, the clown, the active politician, and policeman called Jack Hanley, whom he referred to as a bad Jack. When John confessed to the police, he claimed to be relaying the crimes of Jack, who detested homosexuality and who viewed male prostitutes as a weak, stupid, and degraded scum. His lawyers hoped to have John plead not guilty by reason of insanity to the charges against him. Presenting John as a Jekyll and Hyde character, the defense produced several psychiatric experts who had examined John. 3 psychiatric experts at John's trial testified that they found him to be paranoid schizophrenic with multiple personalities. Donald Verrees, one of the first victims of John, had testified in trial against him. When John's defense team suggested that all 33 deaths were caused by accidental erotic asphyxia, Stein called this highly improbable. In March 11th, final arguments by both prosecution and defense attorneys began. They concluded the following day. Prosecuting attorney Terry Sylvan spoke first, outlining John's history of abusing youth, the testimony of his efforts to avoid detection, and describing his surviving victims, Daniel Voorhees and Donnelly, as living dead, referring to John as the worst of all murders. Civilian stated, John Gacy has accounted for more human devastation than many earthly catastrophes, but one must tremble just how close he came to getting away with it all. Amrit then urged the jury to put aside any prejudice they held against his client, and as they deliver a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity, adding that John was a danger to both himself and to others, and that studying his psychology and behavior would be a benefit to science. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours and found John guilty of 33 charges of murder. He was also found guilty of sexual assault and taking indecent liberties with a child, both convictions in reference to Robert Peist. At the time, his convictions for 33 murders was the most for which any person in the U.S. history had been convicted. His execution was set for June 2nd, 1980. on death row at Menard Correctional Center, he spent much of his time painting. He was executed by lethal injection at the Stateville Correctional Center on May 10th of 1994. And that concludes our serial killer case. Thank you for joining me in today's video. I hope you all enjoyed this. And I will see you all very, very soon. Happy Halloween.